Welcome back. We round out our show today with what you need to know. Peter, first to you.
Well, you know, they just had these two surveys on that real estate site, Zillow.com. Last week, they showed that 2/3 of homeowners believe their houses have not lost any value in the last year. And then this week, they had another one that showed that 1/3 of the people who bought homes in the last 5 years now owe more than their homes are worth. And what these surveys are showing is a big disconnect between what houses are actually worth and what people think they're worth. And I think when homeowners actually connect the dots or wake up out of their delusional state, I think you're going to see a lot more foreclosures and you're going to see a much bigger problem for the financials in the housing sector.
So, Toby, are we living in denial?
No, I mean, some people live in denial, but, you know, some people bought gold at $980. They think it's going to $2,000. It's funny.
Hitting below the belt already.
I've been buying it since it was in the twos, Toby. Where you been?
I know. Because everybody knows that, Peter.
All right,
Toby, what do we need to know?
I would go another way, which is that, you know, people are worried about oil prices when it goes to the drilling business. And if you look at a company like Transocean, they're going to make the same amount of money. They're going to have the same amount of demand for their offshore drilling if oil came down to 50. So don't worry about oil prices here on these riggers. Let the oil prices come down to $100 and be a big buyer. I think this is a $200 stock in the next year because a huge amount of their new contracts roll over at double their prices. You're getting a buying opportunity here.
There you go. Bob O'Brien, what do we need to know?
You know, Americans drove 12 billion fewer miles in the month of June. That's the latest statistics out of the government, a 5% year-over-year decline. That means Americans are actually cutting back on consumption more dramatically than they did in the 1970s during the height of the embargo. So we're getting the message here. However, you wonder whether when we see the next round of data that'll show us some of the July numbers with the pullback in prices, are we still going to see the same sort of discipline on the part of drivers? I suspect we won't.
So you're not saying $50 oil anytime soon?
Certainly not this week.
That's a safe bet. Boy, you're really going out on a limb on that one, Bob.
My grasp of the obvious.
Way to lay it on the line, Bob.
Thank you, brother. Right here, baby. Right here.
Team, Bobby. Okay, Gary Kaltbaum, what do we need to know?
Our wonderful government just reported GDP for last quarter 1.9%, but unfortunately, when calculating, they use the inflation number as being only 1%. If they just use 4%, that's what they use in their calculation. If they used 4%, which would be normal, GDP would have been down over 1%. I would say our government is playing around with the numbers a little too much.
And how? In fact, the real inflation rate is probably north of 10% right now, so we're in a severe economic contraction.
I was being nice.
Toby, do you think 10% inflation? Do you see that anywhere?
Well, remember, in the Peter Black Hawk helicopters going across the land, he is saying that since they made revisions to the formula in 1984, 86, 88, 92, that if you throw all those revisions away, we may be at 10%. But if you're going to use that logic, Peter, then you have to say that, we don't have any GDP because we changed the way we account for GDP, so you can't have it both ways, man.
No, what do you mean? That's not having it both ways, but certainly we're calculating GDP improperly.
But let's get to wait. Hang on a second. What I want to do now is turn to the markets. Bob O'Brien, we've had 2 triple down days. Where do you see the markets going tomorrow?
Well, we've also had 3 triple up days, 300% days. That's typically the time when we see
that was last week, right? That's classic bear market rally action. Though,
right? Or it's a time that we see a conversion from a bear market into a bull market. It may not happen. We may have to go back and test the July lows, but I suspect they're in place.
Well, Toby, how low are those tests going to go?
Well, you can assume that first off, this is August, so really basically it doesn't count for anything because the volume's so low. Let's get September in and let's see where remember when Merrill Lynch took this big write-off and the other guys took these big write-offs, everybody else now in the banking industry has to adjust their numbers. So you can bet, $1 billion that everyone is going to be marking down just because they have to mark to market.
All right, Gary Kaltbaum, what do you see the markets doing tomorrow?
Simple. I think commodities hit a near-term low today, which means they're going to rally more. Unfortunately, all the consumer areas that are let off the low are going to head lower. That's retail, airlines, financials, and the like.
Well, Peter, I don't want to ask you about our market because I know what you're going to say. It's going to be awful. It's always awful. But the fact is that Europe is also seeing a slowdown. The Europeans are getting very concerned about the economic slowdown there. The fact that they are not going to be raising rates anytime soon, does that strengthen the dollar that you've been
we don't know that.
2 weeks?
We don't know that they're not going to be raising rates. Certainly there is some
we got a pretty good idea about it. They haven't the last time.
But they might. But remember, the source of their economic problems is America. And not because we're slowing down. Their problem is they loaned us a lot of money and we can't pay it back. That's the problem.
Toby, the problem with Europe is they get a quarter of their energy supplies from Russia, too. Inflation is a problem. Am I right?
Well, the problem is demographics. Their average age of their population is almost 10 years older than the United States. So Peter's argument always is that we're going down the tubes. Well, if we're going down the tubes, then Europe is all the way down the slide board.
Where does it even, Peter? Quickly.
Well, look, in the short run, we'll probably gold with this big drop down. But
no. But where in the world? Do we look to Asia only?
Look, long-term, Asia's great. But I think Europe still looks good in the short run. I think once they shrug off these horrendous losses that they made lending money to us, they're going to be able to move forward. We're stuck because it's our economy that's the problem.
All right, we got to leave it there.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll see you back here later. We thank you very much for turning in and watching.
Happy Hour with your hosts, Rebecca Gomez, Cody Willard, live in the Bull&Bear Bar.